So what I have here is two separate diagrams. One is of just the bone structure, skull essentially, and then the other one is it's that same drawing, laid tracing paper over it, and drawn out the forms of the nose. So this gives you a fairly detailed depiction of what is happening with the cartilage of the nose. Most of the nose is made up of cartilage. About 2/3 of the height of the nose is cartilage, and that remaining third, upper third, is bone. So if we take a look at this one here, we can clearly see how that nasal bone starts to jut out, moving away from the face. And this varies a lot from person to person. So when we're looking at people, we have different ethnicities, we have children, older people. This is really important to understand the shape of this aperture, because that really makes up the shape of the nose. So for example, if we're looking at an African American, they tend to have very broad noses. The aperture itself is much broader. So understanding that bone structure is important when we're working with different ethnicities. When we're drawing the nose, before we start mapping out all of this stuff, I think it's important to just understand that the nose is essentially a planar structure. We can define the nose with a series of planes. So I'm going to take a piece of tracing paper and lay it over my skull, and then just kind of redraw the nose. It'll be similar to the second diagram, but I'll show you how I would go about it. Rather than drawing every little section of cartilage, if we first think of the planes, it's going to be so much easier. The top of the nose is here, and the base of the nose is going to end up about here. And from here, what I would essentially do is start to construct my nose as a planar form. So I would look at, come back to this, we look at front plane here. Now we have a drastic 3/4 view, almost a profile. So we don't see a lot of front plane, but I would sort of follow that and continue that out. If I was drawing an actual person, you might see differences here. Like you might see, this might jut out, and then the nasal bone essentially ends right there. So on a lot of people, you might see a dip right here, might dip in, like so. I actually have a nose like that. There's a pronounced arc there, and then there's an indentation, and then it kind of starts to come back out over here. But before I even observe that, I'm just going to look at this angle. This is my front plane. I can simplify this into a general angle. Depending on how I'm viewing the nose may determine whether or not I see a bottom plane. And if on my original diagram, I did include a little bit of the bottom plane. So I'll do the same here. And I'll just kind of define that. So then what I can end up doing is putting this, dropping this whole thing down into a bottom plane here. All right, so we can see the base of the nose, we come a little bit above that. That's the division between front plane and bottom plane. And we already have now the space that's kind of worked out for our side plane. And what I could do is start observing, let's say I want to add more of a ball shape down here. Within this planar structure, what I can then do is start looking for organic shapes. So we have, a ball shape right here. I'm going to extend this out a little bit. Kind of more of a, an oval almost, an oval type of shape. I can still very clearly understand division of planes. Like I can see, where we separate from front to side plane, because we have this very strong shadow. And in this case, the shadow shape is giving me a lot of the information I need. We can see that this is pretty straight. So this is really the bone tied in with the lateral cartilage. And then we can see that shadow starts to come out this way. And that tells me that I'm moving into the ball of the nose. And then we kind of come down and around this way. So, there's lots of subtle tonalities that are going to help me when I'm drawing this. It's going to help me to understand my structure. So as I draw it, I'm going to
start with the block.
So when I'm looking at the nose, I'm going to also try to sort of figure out a center line for this and work that in. Now I'm going to kind of look at my division of planes. So I'm going to try to figure out where this bottom plane is. And I can tell approximately where it is because there's a shift in value. We have general light right here. And then it gets a little bit darker down here. So not a lot of that is bottom plane, but I will put a line in to show where that bottom plane is. And I would just go ahead and look at, the planes now. I would just kind of try to figure out. So there's a certain portion of this is bottom plane. So, I would kind of go through this and, more carefully work out my shapes. But I can see that structure. Some of it you can imagine. You're not drawing 100% from observation. You're sort of drawing what you know a little bit, combined with observation, which most of the time is how we draw anyway. We're searching for information, and we're using our reference to guide us. But a lot of times we will sort of add our own little interpretation of what we're seeing into the drawing. And then the more knowledge we have, the easier that will be. Like we can start to, superimpose some of our knowledge into the drawing. So what you can see now is I have, again, front, bottom, and I'll throw in a light indication of side plane over here. Do I see it on this side? Not too much. I might see just a sliver of that side plane over here, because we do have a little bit of a 3/4 view once again. And, this information to me is a starting point. So now from here, I'm going to tweak this a little bit. I'm going to pull this shadow over. It was a little too wide here in this front plane. So I'm going to pull this shadow line over in this direction. But now where it starts to curve out, that's where I have my ball shape. So I'm going to use that shadow information here to my advantage. And, I can just very lightly add some of these organic shapes. How much of that do I actually want to draw? Do I want to really draw that all the way through? You certainly could if you wanted to. Like you could find that whole shape in there. Very round. Somewhat of an oval, more of an oval than a sphere. And then over here, we come to the wing, and I can just go ahead and start postering in my shadows. I can darken all of this. I can also start looking at lights as well, because I'm working on a toned paper, so I can add white for my highlights. And it's just about rendering the drawing. So I can kind of go back, look at the highlight, you know, look at this subtle gradation of light on the form. You know, and if we kind of go back to what our form is, you know, we think about a ball shape. Just do this on the side here. Forms of the face, when we start shading it, I'm always going back to basic form, like what my form is. So the simplest possible way of kind of indicating that form, you know, I think of that center portion of the nose as being a ball shape, something like so. A highlight over here, and then I have a very slow turning through here. So there's some gradation of value from the edge of the shadow in towards the light, right? But it's a very simple structure. Have a little general light through here, and I can blend that and make it real pretty, but that's really the basic ball shape that I'm getting here. And then when we come up to the upper portion of the nose, right, we have more of a block-like form. So this is where we get those differences within our transitions. You know, so just going back once again to a real simple shape. Let's say that's more of a block. We would have perhaps a little bit less transition from the shadow side into the light side. You might still get a highlight through here, but there's going to be a stronger contrast right here. And you can see how just the way we shade that can show the differences within the form too. And when I start to look at the halftones, that's really where I can play with that manipulation of form. And so right here, it gets very soft. There's a lot of halftone right in here. So I'm going to look at that transition. And I'm essentially going to try to accentuate the roundness of the nose by creating that transition. Kind of start to lose that shadow edge a little bit. You know, thinking of the face, I'm always breaking it down into, if we're thinking of just structural drawing in general, you know, what that means to me is I'm trying to work out three-dimensional volumes in space. And I'm always thinking of what the volume is. And it goes back to the three basics. Is it a block or a box? Is it a sphere? Or is it a cylinder? All forms are some variation of those things. You know, now taking something like the nose, it's essentially a block. But within that block, we can start to see that there is, in fact, a little spherical shape. And then there's also another little, you know, I can just kind of go back to this one and start adding on little things. So I can create my nostril shape here, and I can essentially turn this into a nose just by embellishing and adding on to those basic structures. Nostril there, I can cut back in this way. I can find my other nostril. So you can see how with just a very, very basic shape, and all of a sudden I have a nose.